Happy Saturday, leaders. This is Wes coming to you this morning to give you some further clarity about learning targets. I know it's one of those things you love to talk about when you're having donuts and coffee on Saturday morning. At this point, Saturday afternoon, I'm assuming for many of you. Long story short, I had a classroom leader come to me yesterday after the meeting and ask if they were to not read the learning target aloud or if they were, because I had created some confusion. So, um, just want to follow up on that and give everyone a better sense of what I was talking about when I mentioned integrating learning targets throughout the lesson. And firstly, why does all this matter? Why do learning targets matter? Why are we focused on it here as part of our 4 focus areas from last year and this year? Not only does the research on education talk about the importance of clarifying learning targets and embedding it into the process, but it is something that continues to prove time and time again throughout all the meta-analysis that's going on in education that clear targets that align to the formative evaluation process have one of the greatest effects on student achievement. Students must know where they're going and know what that looks like. My message yesterday was really more about not droning on and reading it aloud and thinking that that's going to cure all the things in your classroom. In fact, reading them aloud is probably in and of itself going to do nothing. If you just read the learning target aloud, it's not going to do that much more than if you didn't read it aloud. But you should absolutely be integrating it into the process and thinking of ways that you're communicating the learning target to students, not just the beginning of class, but throughout the class, through establishing a clear criteria of what that looks like and modeling that process for students in a variety of ways and allowing them to share their own learning that models that process. So again, just reading it aloud is not the point, especially if you read it aloud and there's no interaction from students with it throughout the lesson. Therefore, talking about learning targets and key ideas about learning targets from one of my favorite books right here in front of you, Learning Targets, which someone in this school has because I can't find it anywhere in my office. I want to briefly share some of the key assumptions here about learning targets. Firstly, they have to be integrated from throughout the unit. So it's not just a target is not a standalone target. They go from one day to the next. So many of you all are showing these calendars in your room, and the targets do build off of each other as they go along. Additionally, teachers can share the learning targets in a variety of ways, but it's really more important than just sharing the target is that students understand the performance and activity that will show evidence of this. So we at Thomas Nelson have called that evidence of learning, and that's something that we will continue to refine. Here it says, together teachers and students use evidence to make decisions about further learning, which is really the most important part of the process. Additionally, thinking about misconceptions, it says, misconception 1, informing students about the learning target, about telling them what it is or about writing on the board is sufficient. And I think that's just coming back to this key point that talking to them about the learning target only will not move learning forward. Students are really going to be able to understand best when they see examples of that and it's embedded into the process. So let's give an example here. So as a writing teacher, I just adapted this from some things I was doing 3 or 4 years ago. I guess that was more like 6 years ago. The learning target was, by the end of the period, students will be able to write a logically organized paragraph using highly relevant evidence from reading a true war story. This is by Tim O'Brien. The evidence of learning for these students was they would be writing a meal response on the nature of truth, which is our larger question. We had an ongoing quality rubric that we used throughout the year. This was pretty much what was a standard rubric that I was using. And crucial to that was our ability to be able to show, let's move this down here to this slide, was my ability to be able to show students what that level 5 looked like. So this example here was an example level 5 meal response that I used to get that point across. To take it to another level, though, we're really going to have to be able to, so that scaffolded in some level into a level 5 response, but there was a lot of work that went into that to get them there. So taking it even further and thinking about teaching any skill, is students need to be able to see that at a variety of levels. So this learning target, similar to the last one, writing a meaningful, well-developed paragraph using highly relevant evidence from the book or the story, I guess, the visit in this case, very similar, but I want to show you some differences in how this was scaffolded to show student examples. So same way, Mill response on what does it mean to be human, and they did that here. So this is an example level 2 or 3 response for students, so they could see that this was kind of the baseline, the basic response that would get students to level 3. This being a level 4 in terms of meaning and development. So as you'll see throughout, the organization is not bad. It is meaning and development that I'm focused on in this lesson. And you're seeing a level 3, a level 4, and a level 5. And allowing students the time, that 4 or 5 minutes maybe to read through these and assess them, talk about what makes one stronger than the other using that language of meaning and development, is going to be the difference between them getting to a level 5 or hovering at a level 3. So if you think, I don't have time to create these types of models, the reality is we don't not have time, because the clarity that we're giving students by showing them models and building them with them at times is really going to be the difference between them getting to a level 5 in a hurry or sitting at a level 3 and slowly prodding towards a level 4. So just again, some clarity. Like the learning target was here, and there was a great deal of scaffolding to get them to this point where they're writing level 5s as we're looking for. Thinking about this in the larger context of the work we're doing together in learning coaching, walkthroughs, and PLCs, the key theory here from learning targets is that as a part of a unified theory of action, learning targets compel everyone in the school to look for and learn what students are actually doing during today's lesson with important and challenging content. That's one reason we've asked everyone to post on the board, in addition to your presentations, as a reference point for anyone in your room, including your students and yourself. In this case, Mr. Mudd has chosen to list the assessment as the rubric. However, the actual assessment was different than this. Since we showed this yesterday, I was using it as an example. Now Dave talked about this afterwards with Heather as well, that the assessment, this is the criteria for success. The assessment was actually a different activity. So smart note-taking and a open response question were the actual assessments. The Achievement Museum is also a place where we are coming together in a unified way to look at the type of work that's going on in our classrooms. And these two examples here are one way that we are collectively learning together. Best way to learn what's going on in the school, be in the classrooms. Visit your peers in your hallway, see what their learning targets look like. Okay, the last piece of learning targets is they're for students. They're not for us as teachers, they're for students. And we want to make sure that they are there to guide student learning and writing them from the student's point of view. Ms. Peterson does a fantastic job of this. This is one from this week. She had an additional target in this lesson, but this is an example, very student-friendly, and is something that students were to achieve by the end of that period. As a teacher myself, I had students write the learning target down after the Scholar Start each day, and they would circle key words in the target to make it clear, this is our focus for today, this is what you're doing. So they interacted with the target. They also self-assessed their ADL, which in that case was our effort rubric we used, and their level of mastery. Every 2 weeks, we would do a review process on learning targets to connect them to overall levels of mastery on mastery quizzes and tests. So that was what I did. It wasn't terribly innovative, but it worked for me. We would come back to the learning targets at the end of the lesson, and they would assess, one, how hard they worked to achieve it, and two, their level of mastery. This was during a 90-minute block, so I had a little more flex time there, but you can make smaller elements of this happen in a 50-minute period. So how do we, as a school, further our learning about learning targets and making sure that we are working towards exemplary in our rubric here, where assessment is fully integrated into instruction through criteria for success, clarifying targets, and modeling for students. Students are fully aware of and can speak to that process. To be frank, as a teacher, there are lots of books out there. We have most of these books in our school currently that really get in depth about learning targets, you could Google ways to share learning targets and student-friendly learning targets. You're going to find lots of stuff. This slide share here is not a bad example. It's got some stuff that may not be relevant to high school, but largely it's pretty solid. At the end of the day, as we work to think about learning targets in our school, it is not simply about reading them aloud or posting them on the board. That is one step, but it's really more about creating an artful environment where students are fully aware. It's integrated into the instruction. Students can connect the models that we're using to our targets and standards that we're focused on. So, sure, it's complex stuff, but together we can continue to strengthen that process. And as artists and Purple Cows, I know that you guys are fully on board for continuing to invest in that great learning. I apologize for the 10-minute and 50-second video this morning, or Screen-O-Matic, but it is something that we all want to continue to learn towards and come closer together. So, happy Saturday, great weekend, and I'll be probably sending another email or two out this weekend to clarify a couple other big things going on with Sitebase that will move our school forward.